You're the sunshine on my mind. We're burning through the city of lights. You're the sunshine on my mind. We're burning through the city of lights.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're calling from, maybe the middle of the night. Thank you for joining us at EA Connect today. And welcome to the session, 3 Concerns I Overcame Before Signing the 10% Pledge with James Rayton. James will discuss his thoughts around affordability, effectiveness, and advocacy in connection to the 10% Pledge. And we'll also learn how this relates to James's own experience as an aid worker when he was in East Africa, and how that ultimately down the line led to him signing the 10% pledge and starting to work at Giving What We Can, which I'm very excited for. James is the head of community and partnerships at Giving What We Can. And before this, as an aid worker, he spent much of his career leading teams in international development and humanitarian aid. And from 2019 to 2024, he lived and worked across Somalia, Kenya, and Rwanda. James holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from the University of Oxford. And outside of his work, James is an avid hiker and always up for adventure, exploring the outdoors and connecting with nature. I also personally think he's just incredibly warm and friendly, so I really look forward to hearing from him over the next hour. And then finally, as a reminder, if you have any questions for James, he'll try to have an interactive session today. You can submit them via the Swapcard app, just like in previous sessions. And I'll just be selecting a mix of your questions and a few prepared ones during the Q&A at the end, which we'll have some time for. And then after this, we'll have office hours. Similarly to previous sessions, we'll jump over to Gather Round for that. So please welcome me in welcoming James to this stage. Welcome, James.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Joris. Thank you for such a warm introduction. It's so wonderful to be here with you and with everyone else on the call. And just to say a huge thank you for putting this event on. I've already been so wonderful kind of meeting different people and at all kind of stages with their knowledge and understanding of effective altruism. And yeah, just a really lovely event. So thank you for having me and for putting this event on. Today, as Joris mentioned, I'm going to speak a little bit about the concerns I had with taking a 10% giving pledge. And I realize I've kind of put this idea in the title of my speech, but I wanted to share a bit about what the 10% pledge is before I kind of get started. So this is an idea that you give 10% of your income away over the course of your lifetime to the organizations that you believe are going to have the most positive impact on others' lives. And that is the concept that I'm talking about today. And I'm going to go into some of the kind of issues that I came across before I decided to take this pledge. So what were those 3 challenges? The first was a concern that I couldn't afford to donate at that level for the rest of my working life. So this idea, I can't afford to give 10% of my income away. The second, I had a fear that my money would be wasted. If I was going to give all of this money away, I really didn't want it to be wasted. I wanted to make sure it was doing the most impactful thing it could do. In the same way that, when I invest in my pension, I want to make sure that that is doing as much as it can. And finally, I had a concern that if I did take this pledge, my friends and family would think that I was somehow virtue signaling or was coming across as kind of holier than thou. So let me take you back to an early stage in my giving journey, and it's 2019. So let me just jog your memory. What was happening in 2019? So there's a fire. It's broken out in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, France. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have welcomed their first child, Archie, into the world. There's this mysterious infection going around in somewhere in China, but I don't think we need to worry too much about that, because the most important thing happening in 2019 is that I still had hair. Very significant, ladies and gentlemen. No, in all seriousness, in 2019, I was working for an NGO, and my job put me face to face with some of the very most vulnerable people in the world. This picture here is of Zatari refugee camp in Jordan. It's not as big now, but in 2019, it housed around 80,000 refugees who'd fled from the war in Syria. I was there as part of my work, exploring how the education offering that we were working on in camp was going to be improved. And I was looking at children trying to learn in these cramped conditions. And many of those children actually had never known a life outside of this camp. They'd been born in the camp, they'd never left it. It was this simultaneously very kind of depressing experience, but it was also very uplifting. So people were really suffering, kind of eking out an existence. But I could also see the efforts of NGOs in the camp were having a real difference. And I could also see that my work was having some difference in that work. The problem is I then finished that trip and I returned to London, where I was living at the time with some flatmates. And I found myself having feelings that are quite familiar to many working in the aid sector, which range from anger through to sadness or guilt, even about the suffering that I'd seen on my trip, and that I knew was happening so many other places around the world. You'll actually find, and this was certainly my experience in Somalia, most kind of really hardcore humanitarians are often really very stoic, or even kind of come across as quite detached and cold even. They put emotional distance between themselves and their work, and I wasn't having very much success with that. I was actually just really upset. And I was having dinner with my flatmates soon after I got back, and I said, I really think the rich have a responsibility to these people in these camps. The wealthy should do more, and they should be making a bigger contribution. My flatmate then asked me a question, which, now I think about it, has changed the course of my life. He said, "Who do you mean when you say the rich?" And I paused for a moment, and then I responded, well, at least the top 5% of global earners. Now, I said the top 5%, thinking I was referring to some kind of other group, some kind of global elite. I certainly didn't think that I was in that number. But it turns out I was. Giving What We Can has an online calculator which shows you where your salary puts you relative to the rest of the world in terms of your earnings. It's adjusted for the cost of living in your country, so purchasing power parity for the economists amongst you. If you have, and this is specific to the USA, and you can definitely go and check out this website, but if you have a salary over $20,300 USD per year in the USA post-tax, then you are in the top 5% of earners globally. I just think that's insane, right? And we compare ourselves constantly to our friends and our neighbors and our family. We don't take this view of the whole of the world. And when you start doing that, for me at least, that really changed my perspective on how much power I thought I had. It really triggered this kind of crisis of conscience for me. How could I balance this idea of my morals with my bank account? Could I give 10% of my income away? My job meant that I was regularly exposed to these kind of impossible, heartbreaking situations. I just gotten back from a refugee camp. But the thought of giving away 10% of my income still really scared me. And I think that's a natural reaction, honestly. I was planning to propose to my now wife the next year. I was paying rent in one of the most expensive cities in the world. I was earning a lot less than some of my friends from university, and none of them were donating on this scale. So I wasn't sure what to do, and I started doing a bit of digging. This is a graph from Gapminder, and it shows the bell curve of global income per day in 2022. So at the bottom, you can see US dollars per day, and you can see that bell curve there. I was in the top 5% of global earners in that grey section. So if you earn over $20,300 in the US, then you're there too. The difference between the top 5% and the top 2%, again, this is just in the US, the difference of that amount is about $28,000 per year post-tax. Now, I would argue that if you choose a career with medium to high income potential, it's possible that you could make the leap between the top 5% and the top 2% with hard work, dedication, and commitment. I'm sure that many people on this call have made similar leaps, largely by putting in the hours and working hard. In other words, I think it's very feasible and that a lot of people do move from the top 5% to the top 2% of earners due to merit. The question I then asked myself was, is the gap between the richest and the poorest down to merit? The area on the left is the international poverty line. It's at $2.15 per day. According to the World Bank in 2022, 8.8% of the global population, or 700 million people, lived below that level. These people on the left are our counterparts on the bell curve of global income. Is it our hard work that means we're not living on $2.15 a day? It's a distasteful question, and it's uncomfortable. But honestly, it's uncomfortable because there's a very obvious answer. Of course, it isn't based on merit. Instead, the difference is down to one thing: luck. Totally based on luck. If I was born in Haiti or Yemen or Somalia or Burundi, my life would look completely different. Most of the people on this call, I would argue, are the people on the right-hand side of the graph. We are the winners of the lottery of life. And just as much as the people on the left-hand side of the graph have lost out through no fault of their own. If you're sitting there thinking that $2.15 per day sounds literally unlivable, you'd be right. And remember, this is the equivalent of living on $2.15 in the US. That's what we mean by purchasing power parity, adjusted for the cost of living. We're not talking about struggling to pay nursery fees here. We're talking about scraping enough together to have a bite to eat at some point in the day. The challenges we face at the one side of the bell curve are completely different to the challenges on the other side. Living on less than $2.15 per day means it's likely you'd be in a group that's not had any form of schooling. In fact, 8% of children worldwide have not had any access to learning. It's likely that you don't have regular access to clean drinking water. 9% of people globally are in this position. And for me, the most horrifying thing, it's likely that you'd be stunted. This is where malnutrition means you can't develop your body or your brain fully. The effects last a lifetime with lower IQ and smaller bodies. The World Health Organization estimates that 149 million children under 5 were stunted in 2022. That's just under 25% of all children under 5. This is not fair. And this is not the kind of world that I want to live in. And I believe if you're at this conference and you've joined this call, it's not the kind of world you want to live in either. In the end, I decided that I would dip my toe in the water and give 5% of my income away for 6 months. And I could always stop if it was too much. And I was really surprised, honestly. My experience of giving 5% away didn't feel like that much of a burden. In fact, the biggest change in my life wasn't in my bank balance, but in my own feeling of pride and happiness in this decision that I'd made. So my 6 month trial pledge came to an end, and I made a bigger decision in April 2020. It was then that I signed the 10% pledge with Giving What We Can. And I've been giving away 10% of my income post-tax since then for the last 5.5 years. I've made that commitment to continue doing this until I retire. It's become one of the things I'm most proud about in my life. It's become a kind of cornerstone of how I view myself. And I get so much joy, honestly, so much joy from the 10% that I give away, way more than I spend 10% of my income on anything else. It's become this kind of defining part of how I see myself and how I talk about myself and how I kind of see my value in the world. Is a lot of it is anchored to this idea that I give away 10% of my income. And of the small sacrifices I've made, if any, the shift in mindset means I can do something so much more meaningful with my life. Now I'm working at Giving What We Can. I ended my humanitarian work back in 2024. But it also means I get to speak to people like some people like you, some of you on the call who I'm sure have signed a pledge already, but also other people on this call who might be in that top 5, top 2, top 1% of global earners. And you have enormous power to make a difference, and you might just not realize it yet. So take a look at this QR code. If you've got your phone with you, scan that code, check out how rich you are in a global in the global sense, and maybe have a think about how powerful you are. This isn't about making you feel guilty, like you've done nothing wrong, but you do have enormous power if you're in that wealthy part of the bell curve, and you could have a huge impact on other people's and other animals' lives. And I think it's an important thing that we should all bear in mind. So now back to 2019. I decided I could afford it, and actually I was able to give more than I'd ever done before. But then I had to overcome my second concern, and this is the idea that my donation would be wasted. We look for efficiency and value on a daily basis, right? Whether it's shopping, scheduling our lives, or investments. And I want to just take a minute with you all now and apply the same scrutiny to giving, effective giving. It's really hard to pick the right intervention or charity. So let me just demonstrate this with a bit of on-call, on-conference engagement. So I'm going to ask you to put some answers into the chat in a second, and we'll see how well you are at charity evaluators. See whether you can be effective in your giving. I'm going to take a very common issue in international development, and this is something that I've worked on before. So each year, around 1.2 million people die from waterborne illnesses. That is a horrible fact, but there are many ways that we can help these people and save lives. So here are 3 options, and all of them are based in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where most of my experience has come from. The unit of measurement we'll use to compare our interventions is 1 year of healthy life added per $1,000 invested. Some important things to note. These figures are taken from the Disease Controls Priorities 3rd edition. It was published by the World Bank in 2015. So it's an old report. They're retrospective. So the study happened after an assessment. You wouldn't necessarily, therefore, be able to see which interventions are most effective going forward. We can't guarantee that there'll be the same level of effectiveness in the future. They also assess the average, not marginal cost effectiveness. If we tried to save 1 more extra year of life, we might not get the same results. And finally, they're about interventions. rather than whole charities. So it's individual programs that we're looking at assessing here. Okay, that's the small print. So let's jump in. Which intervention should be funded? So the first is in rural areas. This is the pipe water. In rural areas that already have some water treatment infrastructure, we extend it to more households with pipes and sewer connection. So it's an infrastructure project. 2, we provide household chlorination packages so that dirty water can be cleaned in batches. So we give out these batches of chlorination sachets so that we can clean water in batches. That could be in a tank for a village. It could be smaller individual portions. 3, we take standard oral rehydration therapy and we add zinc to it so that someone, when they're already sick and dehydrated from waterborne illnesses, they can get some additional vitamins. So just changing rehydration therapy, rehydration salts. So on the chat, if you're watching on the chat, if not, just think about it in your head. You've got your big donation for the year. Are you going to give it to 1? So the piped water and sewer connections. 2, chlorination treatment for households. Or 3, adding zinc to oral rehydration. Just give you a second to think about that. I can see the chat here, see what's coming in. I will keep going. So, first up, 1 second, I'll just bring this back. I appear to have lost my screen, 1 minute. Yeah, here we go. So, first up, for pipe water and sewer access. So this is from the findings. For each $1,000 invested, the study estimated that roughly 5 months of healthy life was saved for one individual. And this actually includes the lifetime value of the pipes because you don't need to reinvest again every year. That doesn't seem that great, but there are worse ways to spend $1,000. Some charities actually have a negative impact, so this often isn't that bad. Now, household chlorination. So we get an average of 5.3 years of healthy life per $1,000 spent at the time of the study. Both piping and chlorination deliver clean water, but one costs thousands of times less. So giving out these sachets is actually very cheap. Digging and installing pipes is extremely expensive for a charity to do. So there's many reasons why chlorination is more effective, but it's basically down to the lower cost. And third, we have zinc added to standard oral rehydration. This saved just over 33 years of life per $1,000. Turns out that adding zinc was even cheaper than chlorination, and because those taking oral rehydration are already very sick, so there's a high need, and they're mostly children under the age of 5, so you save more lives. The zinc can actually be the difference between life or death, and it can also travel to the poorest areas where piped water just can't. Now, hopefully you guessed number 3, but don't worry if you didn't. These are very technical issues. But what if we expand our scope beyond just preventing and treating waterborne diseases? What if we broadened our focus to think about preventing deaths? So really zooming out. If you do that, then you can also look at something called artesunate, which is a low-cost medicine for treating severe malaria. It was the most effective intervention listed in the DCP3 study in 2015. If your main focus is on saving lives and you're happy to shift away from waterborne diseases to malaria treatment, you could have a much more significant impact. In other words, there are efficiency differences between interventions. In this case, the difference between the impact of a waterborne illnesses. But also there's a difference between causes or problems, in this case between addressing waterborne diseases or treating malaria. So we know now that cause matters, and the most impactful charities tend to work in causes that have 3 key characteristics. The first is that they are big. This means that they affect more lives and affect them more significantly, or both. For example, curing a rare kind of niche disease, which is not large in scale, that could be great, but curing a common one would be even better because more people are affected. Similarly, curing a disease which causes small irritation would be good, but curing a disease which kills people or causes huge amounts of suffering, that would be better. So we look for problems that are big. Next, we look for tractable or like solvable problems. And these are problems where there's clear ways to make progress. So there's a known solution or a path forward. All else being equal, we'd rather work on something where there's a clear and ideally easy path to solve that problem. And finally, we look for unpopular problems. So these are ones that actually are fantastic opportunities because popular problems already get lots of money and lots of resources. Ongoing problems, like lots of people are still dying from malaria, get less media attention because they're so common. They're not news. And that's exactly what makes them really important to work on. One of the areas that's thought to be particularly high impact is malaria prevention. Mosquito nets cost around $4 and they can do a lot to prevent suffering and to prevent deaths. And that's actually something we have the luxury of not having to worry about, or certainly I have the luxury of not having to worry about. Now, of course, not everyone who receives a net will use it, and not everyone who receives a net would otherwise have died. So the charity evaluator GiveWell estimates that the Against Malaria Foundation's malaria net distribution program averts one death for every $3,000 to $5,000 it receives in donations. That makes them an incredibly effective charity, and that is why we recommend them. As well as looking at global health and the 4 charities we recommend there, we also address non-human suffering for sentient beings, so animal welfare, as well as global catastrophic risks, so future risks, things like pandemics, rogue AI, nuclear catastrophe. Now, I might be biased as I now work at Giving What We Can, but back in 2019, I found this research incredibly useful. I didn't have the time to read the DCP3 study or make long-term comparison studies between thousands of different charities. But GiveWell and other evaluation partners that we work with, they do have that time. And so I found it really, really useful to be able to find a trusted partner who could help me and advise me where I could get the most impact from my donations. So in 2019, I was right. If I chose the wrong charity, my donation could be wasted. But thankfully, now I had this resource, I knew that my donation could do a hell of a lot. My final concern then was about giving on this scale. And if I told my friends or spoke openly about it, that I'd be accused of virtue signaling, that it might even negatively affect my friendships or my family connections. I was worried that if I was too open about my giving, I'd come across as holier than thou, and it might create distance between me and the ones that I loved. I'm speaking from Western culture, but I can certainly say there that we view some kind of public celebrations totally socially acceptable. If you're skeptical of this, I would really encourage you to go on LinkedIn. If you don't have LinkedIn, sign up, take a look. It's basically people who are talking about their latest promotion or they're promoting something that their company's doing or whatever else. And this kind of behavior is considered taboo often when it comes to charity. Sharing acceptance to a university or a job offer isn't looked down upon. But actually, I think both make sense. It's great to celebrate your accomplishments and praise the people who helped you get there. But it should also be great to talk about charitable giving as well. The same should apply to publicly declaring dedication to improving the world by giving to well-deserving charities that have the potential to transform lives, to save lives. We should be as, if not more, proud about that. And there's huge benefits to doing this. The psychological and social phenomenon of social proof shows how people copy the behavior of others. People are more likely to do things if they see others doing it. This term was coined by Robert Cialdini in his book Influence. And it's commonly used in marketing. So, for example, reviews on websites or celebrity product endorsements. There are tremendous benefits to being public with our actions. Beyond the direct value to the charity, it's important to think about the knock-on effects of encouraging others to be generous. Think about it this way. Pledging to donate 10% of your income throughout your working life can positively impact the lives of hundreds of other people. But if you can substantially increase your contribution to the world just by talking to one other person and they make a 10% pledge, why not do it? Our partners at Longview Philanthropy conservatively estimate that if the top 1% of earners gave away 10% of their income, we could achieve some staggering things in just 2 years. These include permanently ending world hunger, permanently ending it, providing clean water and sanitation to everyone forever, providing double the funding for clean energy resource and research, quadrupling the money for nuclear safety, and 5 times the investment for AI risk mitigation. And so much more, as you can see on that graph. And that's just from 2 years. I'll be honest, when I signed the pledge in 2020, I didn't really tell anyone about it, but I've made a decision. I made a decision 2 or 3 years ago now to change that. I truly believe in Giving What We Can's mission of working to create a world where giving effectively and significantly is a cultural norm. It felt awkward at the beginning, but you know what? I'm passionate about this and it's really important to me. And so I am more open about my pledge now with friends and family, and I'm getting better at sharing my giving with those around me. And you know what? No one has ever reacted like I'm preaching. Always people are interested in this and they want to often learn more. And it's those conversations that really count and that have made a really, really significant difference. I think I will have impact with my own giving, but I'll probably have more impact in my life through the people that I've spoken to about this idea of effective giving. I practiced actually a version of this speech with a friend a month ago, and I got some feedback. And then after a couple of comments and her saying that she'd forgotten I ever had hair, she stood up, hugged me, and said how inspiring she found it. And then other friends have actually taken the pledge themselves after I've spoken with them. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very epic feeling. I'd like to finish. We've got around half an hour, 25 minutes for Q&A now. But I just want to finish by encouraging you to do 5 things on this list. The first is to visit our website. We've got tons of data, information there to help you on this journey. If you're new to effective giving, just try reading about some of these charities. They do amazing things, and it's often really inspiring just to see the work that they're doing. 2, if you feel ready, pick an effective organization. Well, we've got them there listed, and you can see why we think they are the absolute best, and try giving a donation to them. 1 step more, consider setting up a trial pledge. You can do a percentage of your choice, so you could do anything from 1% upwards, and you pick the duration. So I want to try doing this for 6 months, right through to 5 years. It's a nice way to try and to kind of ease your way into being a member of this community and a member of this movement trying to create change in the world. If that works for you and you think it's manageable, then definitely consider signing the 10% pledge. As I say, it's become one of the most meaningful parts of my life, and I really encourage anyone who's in a position to do so to do it. It's an awesome, awesome thing, and you'll have an amazing impact on the world if you do. And finally, tell people about this amazing thing you're doing. It is amazing, and more people should know about this work. So yeah, definitely do that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining this talk, and thank you for joining this conference more broadly. It's an amazing bunch of people. It's an incredible community, and yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, James. That was very, I think both relatable, but also very inspiring. So thank you for donating and thank you for sharing this with us. I'm glad we have some time for questions. There's a few ones coming in already on Swapcard. Please make sure to just put them in the chat if you want to. You can also upvote questions from other people, and I'll make sure that we go through them. I wanted to start by asking James, maybe going back a little bit to the start of your presentation. You talked about how feeling sort of very emotionally connected to the work you were doing and like humanitarian aid was sometimes getting in the way, but that the pledging now and the donating really brings you joy. I'm curious if there's like a moment that you can share where you really saw that stark difference and that was like really meaningful and warm to you.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's actually probably the first donations I made after making a 10% pledge. I'd been giving fairly significantly beforehand, and I'd been doing this trial pledge. But after I'd taken the pledge, and then I made that because then I had this budget, right? I had a budget for giving, and the first donations I made after that, it kind of felt like I had this budget, and I could kind of go shopping, if that's a way to describe it. Probably not, but I had this budget, and I could go on the site, and I could really look around and think, okay, well, I've got this much, I can donate this much to them, and it just felt like more kind of structured and more freeing almost. Like I wasn't having that question of like how much should I donate or like looking at my budget. It's like I've committed this now. So I felt free from the kind of stress of it. And I felt empowered to be like, okay, I've got this budget now that I can use. And I really enjoyed that. And it felt like a really kind of meaningful moment. And also, when you start donating with us, when you take a 10% pledge, you get access to something called a pledge dashboard. I'm watching that grow over the years. I'm at over £35,000 now. And that's not on a big, again, like it is on a big wage on an international scale, but I'm not actually in the top 1%. I'm in the top 2%, I think. And yet I've still been able to donate this amount of money. And when I look back and think about what the impact of that is, that's multiple people who are alive today because of my donations that wouldn't have been otherwise. And that's quite a sobering and yeah, I guess emotionally resonant thing for me. So yeah, I think my first donation is definitely up there, and then looking back over my pledge dashboard and seeing what impact I've had is definitely also up there. It gives me real joy whenever I go on and see that.
That's so good. Yeah, nice. I want to double click on that. Claudio was asking in the chat that to them it feels like giving effectively might feel a little bit colder. I know you just gave some examples of how
Yeah.
this might still feel a little bit warmer, where like giving to local orgs like your local homeless charity or something else. I don't know, feels like warmer and
Yeah.
more you can like see the impact.
Yeah.
And Claudio was asking, how do you balance these?
So I still do that work as well. And uh, I think it's really like I'm in many ways I'm quite lucky, right? In that I've been able to like go and have this career where I can see and kind of like feel maybe more emotionally the impact of my donations, and I realize that that is in a way a real luxury for me. Um, but I also donate to non-effective charities. So there's a really good paper by Professor Paul Smeets, and he talks about having three buckets for your kind of your money. So the first is the bucket that you use on yourself. So I really like getting takeaway, or I really like getting Ubers instead of going on public transport, right? So there's that like disposable money that you choose for you. That's the first bucket. The second one is donating to causes or things that actually are just really emotionally important for you. So I do this. Like I do support a local homeless shelter occasionally. I do have a regular small donation to my old college at university because I want to support that and I want people to have similar kind of opportunities to the ones that I've had. But then I have my third bucket, which is my pledge, my 10% giving, that I send to the most impactful charities that I can possibly find using these researchers and using giving what we can's recommendations. And that really works for me. And I think it's totally natural to want to and human, right? To want to be able to see the impact of your donations and to support local causes that are close to your heart. But it's balancing that head and heart thing, right? And actually, I think when you know this stuff, like when you know the difference that artisanate can have, and this is comparing like within that's comparing within sub-Saharan Africa, right? So like if you compare artisanate to the amount of impact you could have with a local homeless charity, like you're talking worlds apart of difference, right? It feels good to support that local organization and it's good to have local links. But actually, if your motivation is to do good in the world, then I do think kind of ring fencing to a degree your effective giving is important. But yeah, I do all three of those things, those three buckets. That kind of works for me.
Yeah, I like the analogy. That's pretty helpful. And also it's, I don't know, it feels good to know that there's still value and you're sort of allowed almost to
Yeah,
donate locally still. That's
and it's
great.
a good thing. I do think it's a genuinely really good. Like it is great to have local links, and like it's not like your money isn't doing any good as well. Like it is doing some good, and that's a nice thing to do. And like obviously, and this goes across all of our cause areas as well. It's not just global health; it's animal welfare, whatever else. Like local things where you can see the impact. It's really nice, but just understand why are you doing this. And I think there's a probably higher degree that it's because it feels good. Um, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just think if you can try and ring fence this effective bit, then it's a good thing to do.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks. We're gonna go a bit more technical with the question from you.
Okay.
It's a really popular question. They're asking how you see alternatives to giving 10%, and the examples they give is investing money so it can grow and then have a larger impact later, or using it to fund a startup potentially.
Nice, great questions. Yeah, this is a really cool one. So, investing to give is an interesting one, right? So there's a couple of ways to think about this. Forgive me, this will be a slightly more like technical answer, but it's a technical question, so hopefully that's okay. So there's a few challenges with it with investing to give. The first is that yes, you may be able to grow your money, which is obviously a good thing to be able to donate more. But there's two issues that you need to think about. So first of all is, are you really confident, and you have to be pretty confident if you're focused on effectiveness, that you can do better than inflation? So can you do better than the amount of money that would, naturally, increase in the value of the money? Or the devaluing of the money, depending on how you look at it. So that's the first thing to consider. You've got to be very, very confident of that. Are you 90% sure that you can beat the market? So that's the first thing. The second thing is actually a lot of these problems also have like a compounding effect. So they get worse over time. And so I think AI safety is a really good one for this, right? So if you believe, like a lot of philosophers and a lot of people thinking about this now, that we are at this kind of hinge of history, right? We are at the point now where if we don't get a grip of AI safety, it's going to get exponentially worse very, very quickly. That's the way some people are thinking about this, right? It's a lot more effective to donate now, where you can maybe shift policy a little bit, or you can slow down the development of AI or whatever, have that kind of influence now, as opposed to in 5 years' time when we're dealing with much bigger, much more entrenched problems around AI safety. So, and this applies for animal welfare and global health just the same. Like a lot of these problems compound and get worse as well. So there's a challenge there that actually it's worth investing now rather than later. So that's my general view on investing. So I do think there are cases where investing to give or is actually a very good approach. So if you're very confident you've got a good area where you're able to make a lot of money if you wait a bit, great. And if you're focusing on donating an area where there isn't this risk of huge compounding problem interest, um, then I do think it's a good idea. But these are often quite niche scenarios, and I would encourage people to be really kind of critical of that. And then founding an impactful charity. This I think is definitely like I view slightly differently, and I'm a bit more kind of positive on this. I think this is a great thing to do, and I think actually there's a lot of evidence within effective altruism of this being a very impactful thing to do. I'm thinking particularly of the work of organizations like Ambitious Impact, where they incubate, they work with potential founders, they come up with these really impactful ideas, And then they found organizations which are having really transformative impact. So if that is you, then I definitely would consider doing that. The question I think is, can you do that in tandem with taking a giving pledge? And that is very, very difficult, right? So a lot of people really stretch themselves back to the bone and they're like, no, I really want to invest absolutely everything I've got in setting up this charity. If that's the case for you, then I would kind of take the pressure off a little bit. You don't need to pledge. You're doing something really impactful and amazing with your life already, and don't kind of beat yourself up too much about it. It may
I
be,
just to
sorry.
give you, I think
Yeah.
I might have misspoken, and the question was funding a startup that could potentially go on and have impact. And I thought
Ah,
I'd let you speak because I think founding one is also very cool.
well,
But
yeah, I mean, yeah, okay, no, that's great. Yeah, maybe then I'll pivot a little bit here. So yeah, I think yeah, founding a charity, definitely consider doing it. And if you're right back to the point where you can't donate, then that's fine. One thing I would say is that 10% pledge is a lifetime commitment. So it might be that you're earning more in the future. So do consider that. And then yeah, founding a for-profit, definitely like again, if you're thinking that you're very confident that that's going to do better than the market and you're sure that it's going to become this huge business and you're confident that in 10 years time when you can exit you'll still be kind of as committed to effective giving and the principles of effective giving, then yeah, I think it's fine. But again, like there's so many risks there and there's so much challenge of like, am I still going to believe this in 10 years time or 5 years time? Am I going to be able to make enough money to make the investment better? And is it going to be better? Is it going to be able to deal with these problems, which may be worse in 5 or 10 years' time? Would my donation have done better early stage? So it's very complex, but yeah. To summarize, the three things I think about: can you beat the market in terms of your investment or your for-profit startup? Uh, can you also beat the inflation of the problem? So solve more complex, more deeply entrenched problems in the future. And then thirdly, this point about, am I still going to have that moral alignment now, or shall I try and lock in now and get into the habit of effective giving while I've still got this mindset? I think there's something really to be said for getting into the rhythm of it earlier on in your life.
well, thanks for laying that out, James. That's helpful. Feel free to follow up, Louise, in the chat if you follow up questions too. I want to move to talking about effective giving a little bit more. And yeah, you talked a little bit about the importance of social proof. And I'm curious, even if you like internalize that, so say you like started donating and you're like, oh, I feel like I should talk about it because it's helpful. I think it can still feel pretty scary.
Mm.
So I'm curious what a first step is that you have taken or would suggest in like talking about effective giving.
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, like not everyone has to. So like don't I think like doing a 10% pledge is an amazing commitment and like um if you're a private person and actually the thought of talking about with other people just isn't for you, then like that is completely fine. But do know that if you are able to kind of inspire someone else to do this, we think that based on our research, uh, the average 10% pledger will donate $100,000 over the course of their lifetime. Um, and the counterfactual value of that, of being a pledge, because a lot of these people would have already donated quite significantly, but that's around $15,000. So 15% of their giving is attributable to them taking a pledge. So basically think of if you're able to inspire someone to take a pledge, that's like making a $15,000 donation. It's a simplified way of thinking about it. So there is a good reason to do this. For me, I actually found social media was quite a nice way to start doing this because it felt more controlled, like a controlled environment for me. So I could really craft the message, say, okay, I've just done this thing, I've just taken a 10% pledge, or I've just hit a 2 year anniversary of being a pledger and just talk a little bit about what it means to you. LinkedIn's in the way I did that. Initially, or kind of started talking about this, was just kind of saying, hey, this is something I do. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So I think that's quite a nice way to do it. The other thing is, not being so proactive, but being reactive. So it might be that you're at a dinner party or you've got friends over and they're talking about charitable donations. Like, that's your time. Like, go for it. Like, that is the point where we're like, hey, well, actually, I just, I've taken a 10% pledge and, I support the most effective charities. And, oh, what do you mean by the most effective? Well, I mean that actually, you could do 100 or 1,000 times more good. You could donate $100 to this charity and have the same impact as donating $10,000 to another charity. That's crazy. And then you have like really interesting conversations that way. So yeah, I'd say the two easiest kind of ins are, one, be open to reactive conversation. So if it comes up naturally in conversations, then go for it and be honest to yourself and true to yourself and why you motivated to do this. And don't be ashamed. Like, you're doing an amazing thing. Definitely don't be ashamed. And then the second thing is, yeah, social media is a nice way, controlled environment to talk about giving.
Cool. Those are some nice starting points. Thanks, James. I'm looking at the clock. I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask you another question from Lewis, and then I think that might also allow you to sort of work in a final pitch if you want to.
Sure.
So Lewis is asking about who is usually taking the pledge, if it's usually the top 5% or even the top 2% earners in the world, like if that data is accessible and what you're seeing. And yeah, if you want to pitch something in there, feel free to, because then we'll move to gather around
Yeah,
after that.
sure. So yeah, it does tend to be people from a more wealthier background. So the main countries where people have pledged are from the US, Europe, Australia, Canada. So kind of the global north, or the West, however you want to kind of frame that. Um, but actually, I think what the more common denominator is, it's people who are kind of very values aligned to this, and they want to kind of, their objectives in life aren't focused on kind of too much on material gain, or it's not the only thing they focus on. So they've got different kind of drivers in their life or ways that they want to spend their money. And one of the things they want to spend their money on is kind of moral fulfillment, if that's a way of framing this. And of course, there's amazing exceptions to that rule, right? I was in India last year attending EAGX India, and I met a guy who's living in a slum, and he came to the conference, and he was a 10% pledger. And he was just like, no, like, I live with people who need their money, and this aligns with my view of the pledge to the people who need it the most. And I believe I have a duty to do this. And he felt like it should be a universal rule that everyone should do this, which I think I found very touching and inspiring. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that. But no, it's a really kind of, the idea here is that we are trying to create a social norm. If we achieve our mission, if Giving What We Can achieves its mission of 1 million people taking a 10% pledge, will be, if we're going on today's figures, we would be the second biggest philanthropic organization in the world behind the Gates Foundation. Like, collectively, we have this amazing power, right? Like, our movement has an amazing power to do a lot of good in the world. And I really would encourage you, if you're thinking about this, then sign up to a trial pledge, or if you've been donating for a while already, or this really resonates with you, and you morally align with this idea that justice is about fairness, and that we are incredibly lucky through no kind of fault, but no kind of merit of our own, then taking a pledge is a great way to live a morally fulfilled life. At least it has been for me. And I would really encourage you to consider doing it.